Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to Business Africa. I'm Ndia Yoka. Here are the headlines. Gabon is seeking to reinvent itself under Brice Oligui Nguema. Reforms are underway, but how far would they go? In Kampala, farming is no longer enough. Ugandan farmers denounce what they see as unfair competition from Kenyan and Tanzanian agricultural imports. Petroleum-producing states must rethink their priorities, torn between budget emergencies and the request for new growth drivers. Brice Oligui Nguema is taking the reins of Gabon, a country rich in natural resources, but turning that wealth into real engines of socio-economic progress will be his true challenge.
Gabon, a Central African country rich in natural resources, is entering a new political era with the election of General Brice Oligui Nguema. Oligui's election has raised strong expectations regarding governance, employment and economic growth. But the task ahead is immense. Gabon's economy remains heavily dependent on oil, which accounts for approximately 38% of GDP and over 70% of exports. This dependency makes the country vulnerable to external shocks and highlights the urgent need for diversification. Efforts have been initiated in sectors such as agriculture, forestry and fisheries. However, without substantial investment, these industries still struggle to emerge as real drivers of sustainable growth. The unemployment rate remains a concern, particularly among young people, with estimates around 30%. Developing the private sector is therefore seen as a top priority, both for job creation and for revitalizing the non-oil economy. President Oligui has pledged to overhaul the business environment. His government also plans to revise the regulatory framework to attract investors, especially domestic ones, and to support entrepreneurs. Gabon has clear advantages: relative stability, natural wealth, and a strategic location. But for the private sector, the time has come to move from promises to action.
He won the presidential elections with 90.35% of the vote, but what is his vision for the next 7 years? Mr. Jean-Gaspard Ntutumayi, spokesperson for President Oligui Nguema, is our guest today. A 7-year term is beginning. What are the main priorities?
We have 1 to 2 years to lay the groundwork and essentially enable the economy to move and grow. First, there needs to be a solid state and legal infrastructure in place, something that reassures everyone and creates the right conditions for people to settle, invest, and access financing. Once those foundations are in place, I believe 5 years is enough to see tangible results. Within the next 24 months, we should no longer be talking about water scarcity or energy crisis in Gabon. The business climate needs to evolve to a point where, in less than 2 years, we can say that corruption is being addressed and that there is a transparent environment where investors, domestic or foreign, have the assurance that their investments are safe.
What about Gabon's continued dependence on oil?
It's true that Gabon remains heavily dependent on oil. There's an ongoing diversification into other extractive sectors, and the major project is the iron ore mine in northeast in the Belinga region. Developing that mine requires, I believe, over 600 kilometers of railway, a deep water point in the southwest, and hydroelectric dams. We are talking about more than 20,000 jobs at stake. One high potential sector the president will prioritize is agriculture. We have a country with just 5 inhabitants per square kilometer. Territorial planning must include agricultural development, supporting young Gabonese to settle across the country by developing farming operations. The third issue on the table is value addition for our raw materials. We may not be able to process everything right away, but if we start by transforming our agricultural product timber and partially process our iron and manganese, we unlock very promising avenues for economic diversification.
sont là des gisements de diversification économique qui sont très intéressants.
Let's talk about the regional trade with ECCAS. Can Gabon play a greater role in boosting these exchanges?
Yes, and I believe he will. Within ECAS, you have CEMAC, a regional bloc that is functioning well. We need to build on this by extending the opportunity for free movement of people, even before goods. As for ECAS, I think the President will commit to it because it's an economic zone with strong potential, with players like Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo. I also believe that the African Continental Free Trade Area will benefit significantly from the momentum created by these regional blocs.
Underemployment remains high and civil society is pointing to a mismatch between training and market needs. What's your take?
I believe addressing employment is key, and the state alone, its administration, cannot absorb all the young people seeking jobs. We need to stimulate economic activities and private sector that will be able to absorb a significant number of youths. It's not just about a mismatch between education and jobs, it's about training young people in a trade. Let me give a recent example. I saw in the press the military engineering corps trained heavily machinery operators in less than 6 months. Why? Because when the transition government launched major construction projects, incumbent companies couldn't find qualified machine operators. So many young people have left the regular school systems without learning a trade. Sometimes it only takes 8, 9 or 12 months to get a qualification, and the private sector, where activity is happening, can then absorb them.
Thanks for those insights. At Kampala's Nakasero market, imported products flood the stalls, pushing local harvests aside. Ugandan farmers are calling on the government to step in.
At Kampala's Nakasero market, the shelves tell a troubling story. Where Ugandan produce once dominated, imports now rule. Ugandan farmers like Benon Kisomose say growing food has become a gamble. He argues that food imports from Kenya and Tanzania are cheaper, fresher, and more consistent.
When you go to Kenya, you will find that there are a lot of incentives to farmers. Like some go into circles, get fertilizers, and pay later.
Uganda's import bill skyrocketed nearly 18% in just 1 year, shooting past the $1 billion mark in December 2024 from about $890 million the previous year. These tomatoes look fresh and ready for the market. But that's only half the battle. For many farmers here, the real challenge begins after the harvest. Without good roads, cold storage, or support, a lot of this food won't make it to the plate. Food rights activists warn the real issue isn't imports, it's the lack of local support.
Let your agriculture and agri-food markets work such that they give livelihoods, employment, trade.
As farmers seek assistance from the government trade ministry to limit food imports, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni argues that banning low-cost food imports would be a mistake.
So if their product is cheaper, we should use our pockets to support them by buying what they produce. I will be punishing the Ugandans, making the Ugandans to buy expensive rice in order to please inefficient local rice growers.
Uganda's farmers are fighting for survival, and agricultural experts warn that the government must take decisive action or surrender the country's food future to foreign harvests. Mike Kobaleke for African News.
A new energy crisis is rattling global markets and disrupting African economies. Several African countries are being forced to reassess their economic priorities.
A new energy crisis is shaking global markets, and its repercussions are already being felt in Africa. Oil prices are plummeting, affecting economies dependent on the black gold. Crude oil dropped by more than 20% in April 2025, its lowest level in 4 years. This decline stems from persistent trade tensions, including the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration and successive economic shocks. Brent has fallen to below $70 per barrel, a critical threshold for countries like Nigeria, Angola and Gabon. Their budgets are heavily reliant on oil exports. Nigeria is already facing an immediate budget deficit. This is having consequences for its infrastructure projects and social programs. And in Angola, the government had to urgently revise its budget, which disrupted ongoing development projects. The lack of oil revenues is also making authorities in Gabon re-evaluate their economic priorities and slow down necessary investments. In light of this crisis, several African countries are increasing their efforts to diversify their economies, particularly towards agriculture, technology and renewable energy. But these initiatives are struggling to replace oil, which remains a crucial economic pillar for many nations. In the short term, their priority is to manage the social and political impact of this crisis. Yet in the long term, Africa's oil nations are hoping to turn this dependency into an opportunity.
That wraps up this edition of Business Africa. To watch this episode again, head to africanews.com. See you next time.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.